John Wayne would fire a bum bum bum. Clint Eastwood would go bum 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 bum, and 37 people would fall down. This is a Colt single-action Army revolver, 45 caliber. It's the gun that was known as the equalizer, the peacemaker, and the gun that won the West. Some people said God created man, Colonel Colt made him equal, and that's the equalizer. So the first thing you do is when you take the weapon out of your holster or out of a box or whatever, you make sure that it doesn't point at anybody. And then you open the side gate, you take the hammer back to half cock, and that allows your cylinder to run free. And when you turn that cylinder, you can count the holes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now if you've got 6 empty holes, you basically have a gun that has no ammunition, will not make noise, and will not hurt anybody. So now pointing at anybody is a matter of politeness, not a matter of safety. You have an unloaded gun. The way that the hammer works, there's actually 3 notches on the hammer where the trigger engages the hammer. The first notch is called the safety notch, and all it does is click back and allows your hammer to be off the cartridge, just like that. It's not a dependable safety. If you were to get bucked off your horse and land on the hammer, the gun would go off. In fact, Wyatt Earp, the great Wyatt Earp, one time was sitting at a card game in Dodge City, Kansas, leaned back in his chair, the gun fell out of the holster, hit the ground, and went off. And of course, everybody hit the ground. they all thought they were being shot at. So even Wyatt Earp made the mistake. Many of the characters of the Old West used to what they called 5 beans in the pot. In other words, you got a 6-shooter with 6 possible holes, and if you line up the hole that's directly in line with the barrel and the hammer, if you keep that empty, then it doesn't matter whether you drop your gun. So that's one of the possibilities. On the other hand, you've now reduced the number of shots, so you have to decide whether or not you think it's important to be fully loaded with 6 shots or 5. But anyway, it's safer to carry 5. So that's the first notch. The second notch, which is called the half cock notch, is the notch that allows freedom of the cylinder. The cylinder is now loose. This is the loading gate notch. You open the gate, you put the bullets in, and then when you're done, that's how you unload the gun. Now, many times the cartridges will swell after they explode, and they don't just fall out. In which case you have an ejector rod, a spring-loaded rod, that you go like this, and you can knock the old cartridges out. If there's any disadvantage to the Peacemaker, it's the fact that they're not the easiest, fastest gun to reload. When they improved and made semi-automatic guns, even when they improved and made the double-action guns where you just open it up, drop the cartridges, put them in, it's faster. But nothing ever is improved upon the balance of the old Peacemaker. The Peacemaker was absolutely the most wonderfully balanced gun in the world. So there's half cock. Now, you've heard the term going off half cock. If you pull the trigger when the gun is in half cock, one of 2 things will happen. You'll either break the trigger, or you'll break the trigger notch, the half cock notch on the hammer. But either way, that hammer is going to now fall and hit the bullet. And if the bullet is not lined up completely with the barrel, guess what? It's going to come out the side of the gun and blow up in your hands. That's why you never want to go off half cock. That's where it comes from. Close the gate, take it back from half cock into full cock, and now that's the firing position. Now what you don't want to do is when you're handling the gun, you don't want to go from half cock down. Half cock is, remember, the loading position, and many people make the mistake of pulling back slightly, pressing the trigger, which allows the hammer to fall. But when that happens, the bolt that engages the cylinder comes up, and what happens is you get a crease or a mark in between the notches. And anytime you pick up a gun and it's got creases there, it's because people have mistakenly let the hammer down from half cock. You want to go back and engage full cock. From full cock, it doesn't really hurt the gun to dry fire, or you can set it down. Here's what I think would happen with Alec Baldwin. First of all,
oh Lord.
Yeah. First of all, the #1 mistake is nobody bothered to check the gun before they handed it to him. somebody, whether it be the armorer or the AD or whoever it was that was responsible for it, simply reached in the box, handed it to Alec Baldwin and said, it's a cold gun, it's not loaded. And he just simply assumed that it was unloaded, never bothered to check it himself. And so he wound up with a gun in his holster that was fully lethal, at least one bullet in that gun. Fast draw really gets a start in the 1950s. The very first, the gunfights, first of all, the gunfights of the Old West, the rules are pretty simple. Put every advantage on your side. That's why Wyatt Earp doesn't go down by himself. Virgil Earp deputizes his two brothers and Doc Holliday, and they take a shotgun with them, and they go down Fremont Street, enter a vacant lot, and ask for people to arrest. The gunfight takes 30 seconds, 3 men are killed, 3 men are wounded, 3 men run away. That's the typical normal gunfight in the Old West. Multiple people, because you don't go by yourself, you bring your brothers, you bring your friends, get everything on your side. That's a normal gunfight. Very few gunfights are where one person stands here, one person stands here, and they have a shootout. The one famous one is the one with Wild Bill Hickok in Springfield, Missouri with Davis Tutt. Davis, one of the greatest times that we've spent with WWHA. We did our roundup in Springfield, Missouri, and we got to actually stand in the place where Davis Tutt and Wild Bill had their shootout. Wasn't that fun? I mean, it was a really exciting event. So these two men had been arguing over a card game, arguing over a watch that had been picked up by anger. And anyway, both men go for their guns. Both men probably got off a shot. And Davis Tutt missed, and Hickok's bullet slammed into Davis Tutt and killed him. Two men, hand-to-hand or shooting at each other, almost impossible to match until we get into the movies. And then most of the movies are based on that type of gunfight. However, it took a while to get to that point. The very earliest of the movies were the movies with the silent films. They didn't really have too many face-to-face gunfights. Silent films were different. And one of the things about the old early movies is here's how they used to shoot their guns. They'd hide behind a rock and they'd go blam, blam, blam. I guess what it was, if the bad guys were 50 yards away, you went blam. If they were 100 yards away, you went blam. I always thought it was great that Roy Rogers and Gene Autry would chase guys on horseback. They'd ride, as fast as they could, riding Trigger and Champion. They'd be shooting blam, 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 and then they would get to the place where the bad guy ran out of bullets, and he'd go click, click, and then you know what he would do? He'd throw his gun away. Now wait a minute. It costs a month's salary, and it is not broken. It's just unloaded. It's not working. Takes the gun, throws it away. Now, does Roy Rogers and Gene Autry say, "Aha! You threw your gun away"? No, they put their gun back in the holster and then decide to fight it out. And the bad guy runs up to the top of the mountain, Now he could go there and get away, he could go there. The only place that he can't get away is up on that hill, which is what he chooses to do. He gets up on the hill, but that allows for Roy Rogers to go boom, because they don't ever fight like this. They go boom, 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 and he knocks him off the hill and he rolls down the hill. Or he chases him on his horse, and the bad guy is running away, and then he jumps off his horse onto his horse, and then they roll down the hill, because they always do it on the side of a hill where they can roll down the hill. They were absolutely so far away from reality of what really happened that it was amazing. But remember now, those were for fun. Those movies were just entertainment. They were just for fun. In 1929, they made a film that was based on one of the greatest Western books that was ever written. 1902, Owen Wister wrote a book called The Virginian. Great story, classic story of a fella who was from Virginia, who went out west to Wyoming, became a cowboy, worked for a ranch, and his best friend Steve gets sidetracked by the bad guy, by Trampas, and he winds up going evil, becomes a horse thief. And then when the Virginian actually catches him, of course, he says, you shouldn't have gone bad, you shouldn't have become an outlaw, because now we have to hang you. And they do. They hang they hang him. His girlfriend, his love of his life, who was a school teacher, can't understand. She says, why don't you turn him over to the law? Let the law deal with it. He says, well, we have rules here in the West. Man steals horses, he hangs by the neck until he's dead. But he doesn't blame Steve as much as he blames Trampas for what Steve did wrong. And so the Virginian goes after Trampas, and for the first time in film, we really see what probably is the best real gunfight, where Walter Houston, who plays Trampas, and Gary Cooper, who plays the Virginian, actually have a duel where they move around the buildings, they work behind cover, they come around, and they actually have a shootout that is probably the best filmed shootout before we get into the John Ford films in the 1940s. Absolutely fabulous. There's a wonderful scene in the bar early in the movie, and Steve and the Virginian have gone up to the bar, and they're drinking their drinks, and they're flirting with the bar girl, with the gal who's serving the drinks. They're flirting with her, and in comes Trampas. And he walks up to the bar and he says to the lady, he says, ma'am, I don't know what the problem is between these two fellows, but I can settle it in my favor. And the Virginian says, there's no trouble here, Trampas. He says, if we want to know your opinion, we'll ask you. And he says, you know, when I want to know something from you, I'll tell you, you long-legged son of a... And all of a sudden, there's a gun in his stomach. And the Virginian says, he says, when you call me that, smile. Now that's a famous line. Everybody remembers the line. Does anybody remember what Trampas says after that? No. What he says is, with a gun against my belly, I always smile. And then he takes a whiskey glass, throws it up in the air, and blam, shoots the whiskey glass out of the air and walks out. It's a wonderful scene. If you ever get a chance, the Victor Fleming film, The Virginian, 1929, with Walter Houston, and of course, just absolutely the greatest gunfight of the early westerns with Gary Cooper. We see a lot of changes in the 1930s, 1940s, some good gunfights, some bad gunfights, but we really don't see the gunfight like we see it as when we start the 1950s in television. In a period of 9 days, 2 television shows start on television in a period of 9 days. The first is The Life and Legend of Wyatt Earp with Hugh O'Brien, and the second is called Gunsmoke. These 2 shows changed the look of the Western gunfight, and it is because of shows like Matt Dillon and Gunsmoke that we have the idea of how important it is to be fast with a gun. Fast speed with a gun is important, but not that important. Bat Masterson wrote a series of newspaper articles for Human Life magazine in 1907. He said there were 3 things that made the gunfighter dangerous. Least important was speed. The second least important was accuracy. Well, now you think about that for a minute. If speed's the most important thing and accuracy is the second most important thing, what on earth can be more important? And the answer is what Bat Masterson said was deliberation or personality, the ability to make decisions under stress. And you don't get much more stress than when somebody's shooting at you. And that was what separated men like Hickok and Earp and Bat Masterson. You know, men that developed a fame not because of how quick they were with a gun, but rather how they were able to make decisions under stress and the ability to stay clear-minded and make good, accurate shots. But what started to happen in the 1950s is this fast draw club sprouted up all over the country. The first thing that they did is wear the guns too low. They wore the guns too low. They thought from watching James Arnaz at the beginning of Gunsmoke that the way you draw a gun is you come from the side and you hit the gun like this and you lift it out of the holster like this. Now let me tell you that if you lift the gun out of the holster like this, your index finger is in the trigger guard and your thumb is hitting the hammer like this. Okay, this is the narrow part of the hammer. This is the narrow part of your thumb. It's narrow to narrow. It's like the movie actor, narrow to narrow. Isn't that what? No, that's right. Narrow to narrow. Well, is there an alternative? And the answer is yes. How about coming in sideways? You got a natural groove. You take the whole thumb first into, you hit it wide. Hit it like this, see? If you hit the gun like this, guess where your index finger is? It's in front of the guard. You can't hit that like this and get your finger in the guard. you're going to come in front like that. So the right way to draw the gun is not to come like this, lift the gun like this, because sooner or later if you do this, you're going to hang up and go blam. 100%. Now remember, 100% doesn't leave a lot of room for anybody else. 100% of the people who shot themselves in the toe, the kneecap, or the leg, or whatever, did so because of improper grip. They came like this, they grabbed the gun like this, and they didn't hit the gun like this. Because if they had come in and hit the gun like this, they would come up with a gun that was fully cocked, and their finger would not be in the guard. Therefore, it wouldn't put the gun in a position to shoot themselves. Hit, lift, thrust, and now your gun is pointed downrange. You can't shoot yourself. Now you can still shoot your television set. You can still shoot your wife. You can still do lots of criminal, illegal, stupid things, but you can't shoot yourself. So the way to draw the gun is to sweep back, hit the gun like this, bring the gun out, and not have it ready to fire until it's actually out of the holster, facing down like this. And if you really want to be accurate, don't fire it from the top of the holster, but bring it up like this. There are a couple times in history where they fired with two hands. The gunfight between Rowdy Joe Lowe, remember Rowdy Joe, and Red Beard in Dodge City. Was it Wichita or Dodge City? I think it was Dodge City. Anyway, they had a gunfight, and these men were drinking, and they were gamblers, and they weren't famous gunfighters, but they got into a gunfight. And the newspapers in Dodge City carried the story the next day or a day after, and they say that Rowdy Joe Lowe, when he killed Red Beard, steadied his gun hand with his other hand. One of the very few times that we actually have a historical time of him holding the gun with the other hands. Don't hold the gun like this. That will not be a steady platform. See, like that. You don't want to do that. What you want to do, if you want an accurate shot, is you bring this with your strong hand, this with your weak hand, and there's actually two ways that are recommended. One of them is called the isosceles triangle. You stand like this, and you hold the gun like this, straight up. Okay, the problem with that is if you want to shoot something to the side, you kind of have to move your whole body like that, see? The other is called the Weaver stance. The Weaver stance is slightly turned like this. You take your strong hand, you push the gun like that, you bring your other hand like this, and you actually are pulling against the gun. And what happens is when you fire the gun, blam, it comes up like this. You could actually cock the gun coming down like that. That's how effective it is. So you hit, blam, like that. And that gives you the ability that if you wanted to move, you could move like this or you could move like that without having to move your feet. So the Weaver stance. But that's a modern style shooting. It was not used in the Old West. I know of no cases. There were times in the Old West where people shot like this. There were times where they shot like this, but I don't think there was ever a time historically where they shot in a Weaver stance. I think probably when Rowdy Joe Lowe did it, he did it like this. That's what I think, something like that. But we do know that at least he used a two-handed stance, which is not very common in the Old West. There's only really a couple of tricks that were used in the Old West. First of all, the movie industry likes to spin and twirl guns. And if you saw the movie Tombstone where Michael Biehn spins his gun, it's really interesting because I've had people say, was Val Kilmer as good with his gun as he is in the movies? And I said, you mean Michael Biehn? They said, no, was Val Kilmer, Doc Holliday as good? I said, you mean Michael Biehn? I said, well, think about it. It was Johnny Ringo, Michael Biehn, who walks up and he goes like this. He's spinning his gun. And he does a backward spin, then he does a forward spin when the gun goes forward, he does a butterfly where the gun goes around. And notice I'm not doing that because the arthritis in my hand won't let me do what I used to do 20, 30 years ago. But you spin the gun sideways, spin the gun like that, then he would go one like this, and then he'd take the gun and he'd put it back in the holster with a backward spin. And then Val Kilmer picked up a little tin cup, did a forward roll, did a backward roll, did a side roll, and everybody in the theater scene, they laughed and cheered, and he topped him theatrically. So everybody watching the movie says, aha, Doc Holliday is as good or better than Johnny Ringo. But when the chips are down, Val Kilmer has to spin a little cup that weighs about 3 ounces. Michael Biehn has a 37.5-inch Colt that he has to go forward, backwards, sideways, butterfly, the whole thing, a whole different game, completely different. But nobody in the Old West was doing fancy spins in a gunfight. But I do think because the gun is so balanced, so well balanced, and it just absolutely has a great feel, I do think there were people in the Old West who might have done some goofing around like that. That might have been done in the Old West. One of the few tricks that was actually used in a trick that may have happened in Abilene, Kansas with John Wesley Hardin. Hardin claims it happened. There's no reference in the newspapers, but Hardin claims that Wild Bill Hickok, who was Marshal of Abilene, told John Wesley Hardin that if he wanted to stay in town, he had to surrender his guns. He said he handed his guns butt first to Marshal Hickok like this, and that when Hickok reached for the guns, he spun the gun, got cocked the hammer like that. And so we call that the road agent spin, like that, shifting the gun, the road agent spin. And it was also used by Curly Bill Brocious in Tombstone, Arizona, the year before the gunfight at the Old Corral, when he gets arrested. And Marshal Fred White walks up and says to Curly Bill, "I want your gun." He hands the gun to Curly Bill, spins the gun around. Marshal White reaches out, grabs hold of the barrel of the gun, pulls on the gun. Marshal White was a lot dumber than Marshal Hickok. And so we sometimes call that the Curly Bill spin. Now the way I do it is like this, where you turn it like that and roll it back. In the movie Tombstone, Powers Booth, who played Curly Bill, did it like this. And he went blam, like that. Remember that? All right, so here's my question. Blam, will the gun shoot that way? And the answer is yes. It's the second shot that's hard to get off. Which is why the other way, which was the way I think Hardin did it, bring the gun around, you got your thumb like that, you could fire as many shots as necessary, see? The other trick that we know was used historically was called the border shift. And we know that this trick was tried between long-haired Jim Courtwright and Luke Short. And we also know that Billy Clanton tried it at the famous street fight, the gunfight at OK Corral. What happened with Billy Clanton is a bullet went through his wrist, and he had to shift the gun to his other hand to try to keep shooting. And so he shifted the gun to the other hand. What happened with long-haired Jim Courtwright is that when Luke Short pulled his gun, long-haired Jim reached up like this to cock his hammer, and guess what? Luke Short shot his thumb off. Now, if you lose your thumb, it's pretty hard to cock the gun. Okay? So what he did is he went like this. He shifted the gun to the other hand, like this. So he just simply took the gun, shifted to the other hand. So we call that the border shift, or the shift across the border like that. That's the border shift. And the way I think it happened with long-haired Jim Courtwright is he went like this. He went blam, then he loses his thumb. He goes ah, blam, like that. That's the kind of what he shifted it like that. Some of the old timers wore their guns backwards in the reverse position, this way. This is the way Wild Bill Hickok carried his guns. This is the way the United States cavalry troopers carried guns. Guess they didn't know if they were coming or going. The advantage was not speed, but you could reach across your body with a cross draw. You could reach inside with a reverse draw. You could even come in from behind the gun with a backwards reverse. So from any position, you could get the gun out and get it fired. But the advantage was a lot if you were a gambler. Because if you're sitting down at a table, you don't want your gun down here like this. You want your gun up here where you can get to it. You're sitting down at a table and you're playing poker. Let's say you have 5 aces in your hand. 5 aces is not a good hand. 5 aces is not a good hand in poker. In fact, if you have 5 aces, you want to draw your gun, just like that. Now, you could fan the gun. And if you wanted to, you could fan the gun, which means you hold the trigger down, slap the hammer with the other hand, you can get the shots off. We won't do it because it's hard on the gun. But you do it, bang, 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 you get them off real quick. The problem is the gun jumps around, it's very hard to hit anything. You know, unless the script says you're going to win. Because John Wayne would fire a bum, bum, bum. Clint Eastwood would go bum, 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 and 37 people would fall down. It's just amazing. It's just absolutely fast. You remember those Clint Eastwood movies, Fistful of Dollars, Few Dollars More, Even More Dollars, Spare Change, all of those movies, they were great. What I think happened with Alec Baldwin, he says that he did not pull the trigger. Well, I believe him. What he did is he pulled the gun out of the holster, holding the trigger back. Just like I said, he grabbed it like this, pulled it out like this, pulled it forward like this. And then his job, according to the movie, was to pull back the hammer and make a threatening move. And then he was not able to just drop the hammer like that. What happened was he pulled back the hammer and released it and allowed it to fall forward. And as soon as he did that, it wasn't that he pulled the trigger, he was pressing the trigger the whole time, and that of course produced a fired shot. It's interesting because I think that the world is changing, and that we're seeing way too much violence in films today, in westerns, and it's sad. I miss the story westerns where good guys won the bad guys and evil was defeated, and it didn't have to be so violent, didn't have to be so filthy. It was a much cleaner operation. I think that, you know, if I had to say the best thing that's ever happened in Hollywood in the last few decades is Lonesome Dove. Absolutely a wonderful movie, wonderful picture, and I miss that style. Really fun. I've had people, yeah, go ahead. I've had people come up to me and they've asked me. They said, if you had been born in the Old West, would you have been a gunfighter? And I answer that and I say, I've thought about it a lot. And I've come to the conclusion, there is not a doubt in my mind that if I had walked the board sidewalks of Tombstone, Arizona, or the dusty streets of Dodge City, Kansas, there is not a doubt in my mind that I would have been Tombstone, Arizona's leading expert in Elizabethan sword fighting techniques. People would have come up to me in the 1870s or 1880s and they say, gee, you're good with a sword. It's too bad you weren't born 100 years ago. Because whatever era I lived in, I would have been fascinated with the one already gone by. That's why I love cowboys and Indians in the Old West. Because I'd rather read about them than have somebody shoot at me.
Yeah.